Okay. So we have a few housekeeping rules. Let me share that with everybody. So keep your video on if possible. We would like you to rename yourself with your name and your company. So what you can do is you can click on the rename right by your name and then have your name and then your company. You can also put in the chat, introduce yourselves. You never know, you can find somebody who is in your field and network. If you want to speak, please raise your hand. You unmute yourself and then you ask your question, but that's towards the end. And if you have anything, you can just put in the chat so that we can help you out with it. So I'm passing it to Jessica to start for us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Joette. Welcome, everybody, to our session on eliminating multidimensional poverty. So as Joette's screen showed in the beginning, this is eliminating multidimensional poverty means allowing communities to own their poverty and activate partners. And I'm just going to be hosting the discussion, but the two experts that we have here to speak about this topic specifically are Dr. Martín Burt from Poverty Stoplight and Fundación Paraguaya, and Larry Reed of Thrive Lights. So did everybody see the poll when you first came in? Just give me a little bit of nod if yes. No polls. Okay. Well,
Hold on, let me just do that right now.
So Joette's going to put out. And while that's going out, I'll provide some introductions. So Dr. Martín Burt fights poverty by helping vulnerable families understand the barriers they face and designing interventions to overcome them. Through Fundación Paraguaya, the NGO he created and its signature Poverty Stoplight, an innovative digital self-assessment tool for communities living in poverty, Burt helps uncover economic opportunities to promote self-sufficiency for people struggling with social and financial challenges. Widely praised as one of Latin America's most impactful non-governmental groups, Fundación Paraguaya partners with 800 organizations and companies in over 60 countries. Burt holds a PhD from Tulane University in Development Economics and International Development and is a distinguished visiting professor of entrepreneurship and social innovation at WPI. Dr. Burt has received awards from organizations including Avena Foundation, Skoll Foundation, Schwab Foundation, Eisenhower Fellowship, the list goes on. He is co-founder and board member of Teach a Man to Fish, a United Kingdom organization dedicated to spreading its method of microfinancing around the world. And he previously served as mayor of Asunción, vice minister of commerce, and chief of staff to the president of Paraguay. So welcome, Dr. Burt. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here, ready to share what we're learning and to learn more, because we know that the world is getting bigger and bigger. So thank you for this opportunity.
Fantastic. And Larry Reed has worked internationally in microfinance for over 30 years, serving as the CEO of the Opportunity International Network and the director of the Microcredit Summit campaign, a movement started by Nobel Prize winner Muhammad Yunus. He established Thrive Lights as the U.S. office of the Poverty Stoplight, a social innovation developed by Fundación Paraguaya. As executive director, he establishes partnerships with organizations in the U.S., including the Salvation Army, United Way, and Care USA. Previously, he led global advocacy efforts to focus on ultra poverty in order to reach the 2030 goal of ending extreme poverty, which is what we're here to discuss today. He assisted the World Bank to create a platform for economic inclusion to promote movement from welfare to work. So welcome, Larry. Thank you for joining us.
Hi. Thank you, Jessica. Great to be with all of you here.
Wonderful. So as Joette had mentioned, if you have a question, go ahead and add it into the chat. Or if you have something that just, is really important and you have to get out right away, go ahead and raise your hand and we'll call on you. But we're going to start the discussion today with basically a reference to Dr. Burt's book. He wrote a book in 2018 called Who Owns Poverty? And this is kind of a unique question to ask. I don't think that anybody has really asked that question before, Dr. Burt. So, why did you ask that question specifically? And how did that question inform the creation of the Stoplight? What is the Stoplight as well?
Yes, thank you, Jessica. We started working with microfinance 40 years ago, 4 decades ago. And it was beautiful because we learned how to work with poor women and how to increase family income. But then we started working with youth, and we started appealing to the entrepreneurial spirit. And in some cases, we saw that some young 17 to 16-year-old boys and girls were elevating themselves out of poverty without money. And so you had people with income, with poor latrines, with poor teeth, with poor living conditions, and you had young people without money already graduating into the middle class. We realized that the traditional ways to measure poverty were insufficient. We knew that poverty was multidimensional, but we also knew the difference between an extractive survey, when the census of every country extracts the information, and participatory surveys that provide self-assessment and empowerment. And empowerment and awareness are key for people to understand where they are and where they want to go. So the question of who owns poverty alludes to the fact that if people are allowed to define what it means for them to be not poor, they are more likely to take action in their quest to overcome poverty and flourish. So that's the idea of the book. We are now working in 60 countries, and at the household level, we are all the same. There is really not that much difference between a household in Chicago or in Texas or in Cape Town or Johannesburg or Rio de Janeiro or Sao Paulo. Those who live and sleep under the same roof basically have the same aspirations and their same expectations. So yes, we think that technology today allows this self-assessment, and just like X-rays are black and white, sonograms are in color. So technology today allows medicine to be personalized, and why not? The pursuit of no poverty also can be personalized.
Very interesting. And I think you mentioned in your book too that by never asking the question of who owns poverty, it allowed a lot of different sectors to kind of throw off the responsibility from themselves. Oh, it's not the governments, it's, nonprofits, or, it's the private sector. So can you speak a little bit about that as well?
Yes. Currently, the governments and the international development agencies like the United Nations and the World Bank, they have definitions of what it means to be not poor. And these top-down strategies are insufficient, are well-intentioned, but they have a flat appreciation of what it means to not be poor. And when you allow people to self-assess their poverty, you can incorporate subjective indicators. And people, motivation, self-esteem, thinking of others when you make decisions, having a life map, controlling your emotions are as important to overcome poverty as water, income, housing. So just incorporating the prime stakeholder of the war against poverty in the fight against poverty just makes it so much easier. And instead of having an index that aggregates data, we have dashboards that disaggregate data. And this family that you're showing their poverty stoplight dashboard there, they are non-poor in a lot of things. So we allow people to define themselves not by only what they lack, but what they also have. As the saying goes, if you don't count your blessings, they don't count. So just this is very encouraging, and we are seeing that between the baseline of taking the stoplight in 1 year and doing the stoplight again in a year later, that people tend to green their yellows and their reds in a progressive way, so people can see their journey out of poverty, and they get, as they make their yellows and reds greens, they get encouraged in order to become green in everything. And that is what poverty elimination looks like, to be green in everything at the household level. And by definition, in every country where we work, all the items and indicators are actionable by the family and achievable. So we're very, very encouraged that we can eliminate poverty in our communities, in our countries, and in the world in the short term. That is, in 5 years, if we really support the families in their journeys.
Mm-hmm.
And
Great.
Martín, I think, Jessica, sorry to interrupt here. I think the field that you start in with microfinance in this is a good illustration of this, that with Catalyst, many of the people who are on this call come from countries where microfinance is being used extensively. And you would know that some microfinance organizations actually help people moving out of poverty, and some just put them in debt traps and are seeking to gain money for themselves rather than from the people they serve. And so without a tool like this to help see what's actually happening and to help people set their own plans for what they want to do with their increased income with the finance, we can end up with a tool meant for good that ends up doing harm. And so I think this is why Martín's point about who owns poverty is so important. We need to make sure that people understand their own situation and make their own plans for moving out, and then use the tools that are provided to them by other organizations, by businesses, to help them achieve their own goals.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And for anyone, in case this wasn't clear, this is an example of a stoplight, which is, provided to families. And am I correct in saying that the stoplight is able to be adapted to all different types of cultures, countries? So a stoplight, while it might have, items that are kind of the same all throughout, because poverty in some ways looks very similar all throughout the world, it also will look very different depending on the region, the country, the culture, community. Is that correct?
Correct. And the first thing we do when we go to a community in different countries, we ask the local community to define what it means. What does it mean for you to be not poor? And boy, how much time do you have? They said, people know exactly what it means to be not poor in New Orleans. Just ask the people in New Orleans. They know what it means to be not poor in housing, in transportation, in safety, in food and diet. People know exactly. And so it's very easy to define with the local people, this is what it would be ideal for me in family savings. They know what it means to be sort of yellow and what it means to be red. But the greens in every community also becomes aspirational. People know because their neighbor may be green in that indicator. So all the greens, by definition, are in that community achievable and actionable. And so it just makes very easy. And it has to do with a famous Brazilian educator, Paulo Freire, that in the 60s wrote this great book called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And he mentioned that if people's consciousness is not awoken and risen, they're open to manipulation. So people need, if they have a problem with weight, if I, for example, have a problem with weight, I need to own my problem, regardless of the food environment. So this is very, very beautiful because you really empower people to address their issues in their sense of priorities. In some cases, the family may pick to start with family savings. In other spaces, they may want to start with improving their transportation or their housing or their bathroom or whatever. But it's really beautiful. And then, of course, the poverty stoplight is a metric and a coaching methodology. Nobody can rise above their problems alone. We all need somebody, and this is what the poverty stoplight tries to encourage as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Martín, let me ask you a hard question. Some people, when they hear the question, who owns poverty, they think you're blaming poor people for their poverty, that it's their fault, it's their responsibility to do something about it, and it absolves other people of having responsibility for doing it. So what is your view on that? If poor people own poverty, does that mean that it's their fault?
Well, no. When we ask people to own their poverty, we are trying to empower them. And of course, for example, if a person has no front teeth, we have to allow the family to consider why. Is it because there's no dental services in the slum or the village, or is it because they are not taking care of their teeth, or is it because of the local culture where it's okay not to have teeth if you're a 75-year-old grandfather, but if you're a 20-year-old young woman, culturally, it is very important to have teeth. So what we do is try to capture the perspective from the family. So governments measure, for example, food security or financial inclusion. But from the family perspective, it is we eat nutritious food. You may live in a food desert, or you may live across a farmer's market, and you may have different situations in terms of your diet. But we are all poor because everybody in this room right now has yellows and reds. We all do. We need to take ownership of our journey toward flourishing, because or else it becomes alienating as well. And this alienation can also be unintended consequence of when governments only in a quote unquote throw welfare at people without empowering them. At least that's my bias.
And actually, to piggyback off your question, Larry, I know some of the discussion about the poverty stoplight has also been around whether or not this is not necessarily a replacement, but the idea of the poverty stoplight is to measure poverty accurately and then provide coaching. But this is all going on while systemic change is being worked on as well, correct?
Well, now we have data. Now we have data as provided by families in real terms. I was talking to a United Nations official who was telling me about a multidimensional poverty index in a Central American country. And he says, now we know who is multidimensionally poor 10 years ago. So we need to empower families. Without empowerment, You know, it's much a more limited thing. And having said that, in terms of blame does not mean that there's no responsibility on the part of the parents with their children. So responsibility in the good sense of the word, we all are responsible for how much screen time the babies in the house have with their iPads, how much television they watch, or how much time they read. Do they go to bed on time? Do they eat well? There is also a responsibility that we all have, and mothers know that, and mothers need support because there are too many households led by single women or mothers. And so that is also the Poverty Stoplight also allows us to understand the burden that women face by leading and having these responsibilities by themselves.
And I think another key part of the Stoplight is its ability to activate the agency of the families themselves. That's often what's missing from many programs that are designed for and decided by other people or people in poverty. It doesn't start from within them, and so therefore it isn't motivated by their own needs and priorities. And what the Stoplight does is help them set their own plans, and it helps organizations see this is what the people we're working with want the most. This is what's most important to them. How can we organize together to help them create plans or to learn how to acquire the things that are most important to them?
Mm-hmm. And why, well, has this been done before? And if it hasn't, why not? You know, is this a mind-blowing idea to speak directly with the people experiencing an issue to see what they need?
Well, I think technology is a big facilitator here. Think of a community leader or a social worker trying to understand the multidimensional issues affecting each of their families or cases. How many issues do you think let's say a social worker working in Los Angeles, California, with a community of homeless people? They know that the problems affecting the homeless are multidimensional. But if they're just going to deal with paper, how many folders can they keep in their backpack? And in each folder for each case, how many issues can they deal? It's very limited. But with technology today, the social worker working with a community in Los Angeles or Orange County can have in her telephone the stoplight of each family, of each person, their reds, yellows, and greens, and their plan of action and their priorities. So they can go and says, "Hello, Mrs. Smith, how are you today? Remember that last week you told me that you were going to go to the dentist, that there's a free service by the University of California. Did you go?" You know, follow up and encourage. So it's technology that allows us today to deal with this multidimensional thing and for people to self-assess. Because one thing it is for the social worker to assess a homeless person, but another thing is for the homeless person to self-assess. And of course, we understand that in some cases, the issues affecting homeless person are very, very complex, and they may not be able to do it alone. But when and if they can, they need to be able to achieve awareness as well. And the good news is that we are adapting the Poverty Stoplight with some fantastic people at the University of California, Irvine, to human trafficking. And the same thing happens. One is for the police department to understand why some people are trafficked, but the other one is for the trafficked person to be able to understand why she's being trafficked. So you have a young woman from Ecuador that gets a job offer in Spain, and she goes. And she when she arrives in Spain, she is trapped and exploited. So that woman also needs to be empowered. And we also have another stoplight for education to empower teachers and parents and students and principals. So the role that technology has in promoting self-assessment and personalized journeys out of the problem is amazing. And think about artificial intelligence. So if there's anybody in this room who can help us with artificial intelligence, we need that. Can you imagine artificial intelligence in the hands of a homeless or of a poor Ecuadorian woman or a slum dweller in Johannesburg or in Sao Paulo, Brazil, to have the support of artificial intelligence to weave themselves out of their issue, take into consideration the learnings of hundreds of thousands of families who have been in their same situation? It would be amazing. So this is an ask that I have. Help me, Debbie, with your connections there. This is something that we really need. We really need.
Yes, definitely. And Larry, I want to ask you specifically, so Thrive Lights is the poverty stoplight, but adapted to the United States. What makes the American culture and the way it views poverty unique?
Well, as you can tell from our name, we switched up and we emphasized what people are moving towards instead of what they're trying to leave. So thriving is something that we all want to achieve. So in America, we tend to look at poverty as a personal failing, and people don't want to identify as being poor. And so we are here emphasizing what all of us are moving towards is thriving. As Martín said, we're all poor in some area on this along these indicators. And so we're using the stoplight. We switch, some of the indicators are different levels, and we use different pictures to reflect the American environment. So there's some differences there. What also struck me is how much we still have the same 6 dimensions. When we look across the world with the poverty stoplight, when people do their first stoplight and they make their priorities, 4 out of the top 10 are always increased income, access to credit, savings, and budgeting. So those seem to be universal challenges, and it shows a need for good tools in that area. So it's what we see is families face the same challenges. Families like to be put in the driver's seat in charting their own journeys out of poverty, and families then can access services or can learn from each other or make plans together on how to move out of those situations to move towards thriving.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. Yeah, that in order to work in the United States and find success, changing that name was one of the main items. Yeah. And how many states are you working in?
We're working in 13 states now, and we also just signed our first private company in the U.S. So a company in Texas called Zachary has 2,300 employees in the construction and hospitality industries. Mm-hmm. And so we're working with nonprofits in North Carolina, in Texas, and Florida, and then California. We're working with nonprofits there. We just signed a partner in Illinois as well. So we're working with community development organizations. We have a government agency that is preventive services for families. And then we also have a national Head Start program that does early education programs and then does wraparound services for the families of children in Head Start.
Wow. Yeah. And so that actually is a great segue into something that we definitely wanted to discuss here, which was whose responsibility is it to eliminate poverty, which we already kind of touched on with who owns poverty. But you guys are doing something unique in which you're tapping into the private business sector and the corporate sector. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think we need to understand when we talk about poverty, we tend to think of a percentage of the population, and we think it's the same people that are there all the time. But really, if you look at the studies, it's a lot of fluctuation in and out of poverty. People move up, and then something happens, and they move back in, and so there's a big flow back and forth. And what we're finding is businesses can play a key role here if they can understand what are the challenges that make people have to leave their work and provide services. An example from Paraguay is a grocery store chain that found that they were requiring young mothers to work early morning shifts. And that's the time you have to get your children ready and up and going to school or get them ready for the caretaker. And it was impossible. So they had a lot of women quitting because they couldn't do the early morning shift. But when they switched that, then they got a lot more people staying on, working longer time. So if businesses can see they actually have a role here in understanding what's happening in the lives of their employees and providing services that help them and supporting the communities around their employees to actually help people thrive in that community.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And so are the businesses that you're working with, you have one in the United States now, fantastic. What are some of the other types of businesses that have taken on the Stoplight? Is it always the same type of company?
Let me answer that. We are working with some more than 300 companies in 10 countries. So in Colombia, it can be a flower company. In Ecuador, it could be a banana growing company or a tuna fish ship. In Paraguay, we have cattle ranches. In South Africa, we have manufacturers. In Portugal, we have all sorts of private sector companies. The idea is to empower the workforce and to, if you want to put it in a strong word, to increase the company's return on investment. I see that Mike Reed is here among the public, and he heads an organization in the United States called Return on Investment, the ROI Institute, which tries to have a virtuous circle between improving the lives of the workers and improving the bottom line of the company, and not making a win-lose, but a win-win. And when the workers' well-being and the company's well-being are aligned, everybody thrives. Is a word that Larry Reed uses: the thriving, the growing, the flourishing. And of course, the old First Industrial Revolution, Second Industrial Revolution promoted the creation of a whole bunch of ideologies to, quote unquote, protect the workers from the exploitation, because the logic was that nobody could create a fortune without exploiting workers. Now we are seeing that paradigm is changing, and we need to help employers understand that not because they allow their workers to self-assess their situation of multidimensional needs, will it mean that the company is going to have to triple salaries. On the contrary, it will mean an increase in the productivity of the workforce and the stability of the workforce. So there's more retention, there's less turnover, there's more job satisfaction. People are not asking for advances at mid-month, etc. So we think that the fourth industrial revolution and enlightened businesses are going to be much more successful when they realize that there's great profit to be made by no poverty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for example, Jessica, can you imagine a luxury perfume maker having a role in helping to end poverty? It's not one who you would think of normally, but there's an organization in Guatemala that supplies raw materials to the high-end perfume makers in Europe, and they use the Stoplight with the people who harvest the food and grow the elements that go into perfumes. And so then the high-end perfume makers, then when they do projects in the community, actually use the results from the Stoplight to find out what are the priorities, what's most important, and found it was more important for them to have good cook stoves that didn't provide smoke in the household than it was to pave roads or do other things. So this is a way that businesses, by learning about their supply chain and what the needs are in that supply chain, can actually be part of the process of helping to eliminate poverty.
And I may add, Larry, that we have speaking of Ecuador, we have some Ecuadorian banana exporters. As you may know, Ecuador is the world's biggest exporter of bananas. And so right now they're working with some supermarket chains in Germany where they will have a QR code in every banana where the consumer in Germany will be able to look into the QR code of that banana and will be able to see the banana grower's stoplight. And so there's a connection between the product that people are buying and taking into their homes, and a satisfaction that there's no child labor there, that there's no exploitation of women, because we have heard horror stories of some plantations, but also of some t-shirt manufacturing in some Asian countries. And who wants to wear a t-shirt that is stained with that? So consumers are also more interested in environmental and social implications of what they promote. And so, as you know, the Stoplight aims to empower us all and to be better consumers and also better suppliers. We certainly think that we can help businesses improve their yields by helping their workers and their families, defined as those who live and eat or sleep and eat under the same roof. We know that there are all sorts of different types of families. Some are Muslim, some are Hindu, some are Christian. It doesn't matter, but those who sleep and eat under the same roof. That's why we need to have an integral, holistic view and not a fragmented, that one government agency deals with children, another government agencies deals with senior citizens. No, have a more integral approach and capture the perspective, of the family, because only the user knows how the shoe fits. And you need to listen to the voices of the poor, as the World Bank publication says. Listen, there has to be love, because or else, if you're just dishing out conditional cash transfers, here, take the money, if there's no love, it's very difficult. If there's no compassion, if there's no empathy, we need to listen to the voices, and these are mostly women mothers,
Mm-hmm.
I want to pick up on something that Martín said. Thank you, Martín, for mentioning me, and it's great to see all of you. It's just fantastic that you're here. I want to say that Jessica, Martín loves to use this phrase, and it is so inspiring. He was talking about a QR code on a banana. Imagine you've heard of free trade. Well, free trade took a positive step in the right direction in one of the 6 dimensions, but imagine poverty-free bananas. Now imagine poverty-free coffee. Now imagine poverty-free banking community. Now imagine poverty-free construction at the Zachary Group, where all the 3,000 of those construction workers in and around San Antonio, Texas, and they've taken the survey, they've looked at the 6 dimensions, they've ranked themselves on red, yellow, and green. They've created their own life map, but actually equally as important as doing that, they've tied those indicators. They've tied their own lives to the results of the business, and everything is in alignment. And then you get, you know, poverty-free construction, poverty-free coffee, poverty-free cacao in Ecuador. So poverty-free supply chains is a very big idea. It's a very exciting one, and Martín has brought that to the world, and it's pretty darn cool.
That's fantastic. And yeah, it's so interesting because now, you know, shoppers are waking up and they're looking for specifically organic, you know. So this is just a next step in leveling up and taking into account all of the ways in which we personally impact our surroundings and our environment. And so if we have more people that are just purchasing, you know, poverty-free bananas, then eventually the bananas that are made with poverty or with human rights abuses or workers' abuses, they'll hopefully go out of business. So this is just one way that we can all have an impact on that sector, which is great. And Martín, I thought it was really interesting. I love what you said about it not being just about cash transfers, and that there needs to be love in everything. And this is coming from the founder of a microfinance lending institution. So you know what you're talking about.
Yes, and I know the people who promoted conditional cash transfers, and they are heroes. But we can go. The logic is poverty is a human rights problem, and it becomes a public good. So governments embrace that. But in that problem, in that process of going from human right to public good, to the rights-based approach, as governments embrace these problems, I don't know why they cut the hands of the interested people and says, no, don't worry, you're the victim. Don't worry, we are going to own your problem. And they do it with good intentions, but they don't know that by doing that, they're alienating. And so you have a family, an African-American family in Wichita, Kansas, not being given the opportunity to grow together with the welfare agencies. And maybe the technology wasn't available before, but it certainly is now. And so this is what we need to empower, right? And they need to be allowed to define what success means for them. And Amartya Sen, with his famous book, Development as Freedom, has framed that. A person that decides not to work and not to generate income because she wants to take care of her grandchild needs to be able to value that human protection and connection and be respected, just like a person that opts to send the child to a daycare center. People need to be allowed to be free and to flourish.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So just, being aware of the time, we have about 10 minutes left. So we have a couple more questions, but if anybody does have any questions specifically, go ahead and start adding those to the chat now. So that we can touch on some of those. But I know, Martín, you have maybe like a semi-announcement. I know that poverty looks different all over the world, but one community that honestly a lot of people always associate specifically with poverty, no matter where you are in the world, is the Roma community. So you are now beginning to work directly with the Roma community, correct?
Yes, and it was a very beautiful call that we received from the European Union in Brussels, and they said we're struggling with the Roma because we have a system of a welfare of the European Union, and they are not embracing the welfare programs of the European Union. So we would like, we read about the poverty stoplight, and we also know that it has a lot to do with aspirations. So can you go and work with a Roma to figure out what it means for them to be successful, what it means for the Roma to thrive. You know, there are many problems of racism and segregation in that part of the world, just like in ours. So we're working with Roma communities and Roma leaders in Bulgaria, Romania, and Slovakia to develop the Roma Stoplight, and they are now applying it in their villages and in their communities, and they are empowering those families to develop, overcome poverty without losing their culture, because that's what they're very afraid of. The one strength that the Roma has is their own culture, their shared values. And why we should be able to keep both, right? We should have a housing policy that respects their type of living arrangements. And no, they do not want to live in apartments just like the rest of us. They have their own living arrangement, which I really love and respect. And so this is just like when we go to northeastern Nigeria, a Muslim part of Nigeria, where you have polygamy in some areas, in the good sense of the word, and the housing arrangement is unique. We should respect how people live in every part of the world, because if we do not respect people, we cannot empower them in order to be the architects of their own destiny.
That's so important to point out, that, you know, poverty elimination doesn't mean conforming to the system or the society around you. Making sure that values and traditions and cultures are respected and upheld, that would be true poverty elimination and a true appreciation of the individual. So bravo.
And Jessica, we also learned by asking about what does thriving look like to each community. We learn new things from those communities that other communities can learn from. So, for example, when we worked with people involved in human trafficking that had been victims of that, they added 2 new indicators for us. And one was, have you had a mentor who has been through the same thing you had? So they said it's important for them to thrive, to be able to have a mentor who knows exactly what it is that they went through, that it was hard to thrive if you didn't have help from someone who had been through the same things you had. And the second one that they said that was important to them for its thriving was experiences of awe and beauty, that became something very healing for them when they could see themselves and see beautiful creation around them, that was something that was very healing to their spirits. And that's something other communities hadn't expressed before, but as we think about it, we think, yeah, that's something we can all learn from.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very important. I've done some work with social innovators in the homeless elimination space. And I think, especially in America, that's something that we forget about, that these are individuals, these are humans. They would love dessert, they would love to see art, just because, they don't have, the same resources or access to items as someone who is, above the poverty line. Doesn't mean that they're not human, and they don't also believe or want those, small little treats, the small little blessings. And it really is a part of just humanity. I'm going to go ahead and share the poll results with everybody. Very interesting. Can everybody see them?
Very interesting.
Yep. So we had nobody vote that yes, they think the world is successfully eliminating poverty with current efforts. 37% just outright said no. And then 63%, wow, say there are some successful efforts, but currently there are too many challenges. So first, Larry, Martín, what are your thoughts? But also audience, if there's anybody who wants to kind of share their thoughts on this or why they voted the way they did, feel free to raise your hand and we'll pull you in as well.
Well, I think that we are in this space, that many of us are optimists. We're dreamers with feet on the ground. We believe that change is possible. We see it all the time. So we cannot be we cannot help but being contaminated with joy of what can be done, and that is a very beautiful product of the work we do. It's really a satisfying life because we can operationalize love instead of just speaking about love. We can take it to the village. We can listen and we can empathize and ask people, how are you doing today, and how can we work together, and it works. And there's a lot of work to be done, but I think that we're making progress. But it's an uphill battle, It's it's beautifully difficult.
Mhm.
And I think what maybe the poll reflects, I think the largest untapped resource in the world today is the agency and energy and creativity of people living in poverty. And often programs don't seek to use that. And what the Poverty Stoplight does is it starts there. That's the starting point. People making their own plans, setting their own goals, and then working together as they see each other's goals and targets, how they can find ways to work together. And so I think this has the potential for catalyzing that energy that has gone wasted before. So I think that's what gives such potential here. And as Martín mentioned earlier, with technology, we want to use artificial intelligence specifically to look at what are pathways that people take to move out of poverty, and how can others learn from those pathways? What can they share about? How can we take this global learning, all the 60 countries and the 300,000 pathways being traveled, and what can we learn about that to inform new people as they begin their journey?
Definitely. Well, so my closing question for both of you is, what's next for the Stoplight and for Thrive Lights? And, what do you guys need in order to completely eliminate poverty?
We need computer experts, data scientists. We now have, we are now working with 362,000 families, and we have 550,000 stoplights, all of them with 50 indicators each. We need people to help us understand the data that we have. We need to help make this data available for PhDs, for academia, for government. We want to make this available for people to understand what is the water situation, what is the latrine situation in the world, what is the self-esteem situation in the world. We recently asked our experts to give us information on the self-esteem indicator, and how and the indicator about thinking of others before making decisions. And we found that 85% of the people considered that they did take other people into consideration when they made decisions, but 15% admitted to themselves that they did not think of others, that they were selfish and egocentric. And 5% of that 15 said that they were completely not thinking of others. That is the most fantastic awareness raising documented with 200,000 families. Can you imagine the potential of reaching out to those families and showing them ways where they can increase those aspects? And of course, it's just an amazing thing. So we need help with brains. We need people with skills that we don't have to improve our data platforms, our understanding of what we're doing. So we need help.
And we can also use more partners, more organizations with trusted relationships in a community, employers that care about their employees, that want to use this tool as a way of speeding up and multiplying the impact, the productivity of their work.
Mhm. Got it. And if anybody does want to reach out either with more questions or just to have a conversation or to offer, any of those partnerships or resources, how can they find you?
Just reach us through us through the Thrive Lights page or the Poverty Stoplight page. Send us a message and we'll get to you.
So that's povertystoplight.org.
And
And
I put my email in the chat if anybody wants to reach me.
and Larry at thrivelights.org. Fantastic. Well, thank you, both of you, so much for sharing your expertise and having this conversation.
Thank
you,
you,
Jessica. Great
Thank you,
job.
everybody participating. And I see that half the people have already left to go to the AI workshop. So we should probably go there also. Thank you, Jessica. Very, very nice to see you. And hello, everybody. Goodbye. And please write to us. And thank you for your time.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Bye-bye.